You've probably seen this picture before, right? It's the image of victory, the Soviet flag flying over the Reichstag in Berlin. It's the moment that screams, the war in Europe is over. But for the soldiers on the ground, the men who actually fought their way there, that triumphant end was just one single moment in a long, brutal journey that the official histories, well, they tend to leave out.
Now that quote, it's not about the glory of victory, is it? It's about the sheer horror of just getting to the fight. And it hints at a story that's way more complicated and, frankly, way darker than any monument could ever tell you.
And that is the story we're going to dive into today. This isn't about grand strategy or generals moving pins on a map. This is the personal, raw, unfiltered testimony of Ilya Sokolov, a Red Army officer whose memories pull us away from the towering symbols of war and down into the dirt, the hunger, and the unbelievable defiance of the trenches.
So for Sokolov, the war didn't kick off with some heroic charge or a patriotic speech. No, for him, it started on June 22, 1941. He was just a kid, only 15 years old, and his entire world was about to be completely shattered by the German invasion.
Right from the get-go, his first battle wasn't against soldiers. It was just to stay alive. His family had to flee on this ridiculously crowded freight train, and the journey was a nightmare of bombings and a horrific dysentery epidemic that swept through the cars. Sokolov got so sick, his father had to physically carry him to a hospital, where he was left in critical condition, totally and completely alone.
I mean, can you even imagine that? You're 16 years old, you finally get discharged from the hospital, and all you have in the world is a small bag of dried bread, and you have absolutely no idea where your family is. He had to be resourceful, so he found his way to a trade school, not for a career, but simply to survive.
And then, almost unbelievably, after months apart, his father, who had been searching everywhere for him, actually finds him. But this reunion, it wasn't a return to a safe, normal life. His father, a committed party member, made a decision that's just stark. He decided his son, Ilya, was going to the front.
But getting to the front wasn't the next step. Oh no. First, you had to survive a place called Chebarkul. And you got to understand, this wasn't a training camp like you might picture. It was more like a brutal filter, designed to weed out anyone who wasn't tough enough, mainly through starvation and fear.
And the way Sokolov describes this place, it's absolutely chilling. The goal here wasn't really about preparing soldiers for combat. It was more of an experiment to see who could possibly endure subhuman conditions.
I mean, look at this. The whole setup was designed to just break people. They were crammed into these dugouts, sleeping on bare wooden boards. The food was a joke, a piece of sticky bread and a bowl of what he called green water. Disease and exhaustion were everywhere. And if you couldn't take it, you were shipped off to a so-called weakling battalion. He even said that tough guys from Siberia, who you'd think could handle anything, just couldn't withstand the constant gnawing hunger.
And to top it all off, the camp had this grim, cold logic to it. To make sure nobody tried to run away from these hellish conditions, they held weekly public executions. They'd line up captured deserters and shoot them in front of everyone. The message couldn't be clearer. The only way out of this place was the front line.
So after all that, Sokolov finally makes it to the front. But his assignment? Well, it was to a chemical platoon. And as he found out really fast, that job involved a whole lot more than its name suggested.
They were called chemists. And yeah, they were specialists. But their specialty was basically doing the absolute worst, most dangerous jobs on the battlefield. The kind of tasks that left you totally exposed with nowhere to hide.
Just think about what these guys had to do. When you're the one setting a smokescreen, as Sokolov put it, the enemy knows exactly where you are. You are, in his words, a target on the palm of your hand. They were also the ones sent out into no man's land to drag back the wounded, and they were the ones who had to bury the dead. It's no surprise their casualty rates were almost as high as the regular infantry.
And, as you can probably guess, Sokolov's resilience was about to get tested in a way that is just unbelievable. He didn't just survive what came next, he actively fought to stay in the war, even when the army itself was trying to send him somewhere else.
So it's October 1944. A sniper's bullet just shatters his arm. It gets worse. Gangrene sets in at the hospital, and the doctors are all telling him the same thing. We have to amputate or you're gonna die. But his response was just absolute defiance. He signs a legal waiver refusing the surgery, telling them, better to die, but I will not live as an invalid. And then, incredibly, one determined doctor manages to save not only his life, but his arm too.
So he finally gets out of the hospital, right? And the army officially orders him away from the German front to a new unit, one that's getting ready for the war against Japan. But his loyalty wasn't to the orders, it was to his friends, his comrades still fighting in Europe. So he makes this insane decision. He's going to desert. But not away from the war, he's going to desert back to it.
And the way he did it is like something out of a movie. He and another officer literally hid under hay in a freight car to sneak back across the border into Poland. When he finally makes it to his division's headquarters and reports for duty, some staff officer immediately accuses him of being a deserter. But then a phone call comes in. It's his regimental commander, and he is furious. He's yelling into the phone, "That's my old soldier. I have no one to command the companies." It just shows you, this was about a bond that went way beyond official order.
Okay, so beyond his own insane journey, Sokolov's testimony gives us these incredibly candid observations from the trenches. He just cuts right through decades of propaganda and tells us what soldiers were actually thinking and saying.
You know that famous battle cry for Stalin, the one you see in all the movies? Well, Sokolov is just blunt about it. He says, "I never heard such a call. Never." In fact, he says quite the opposite, that a lot of soldiers in the trenches openly hated and cursed Stalin, blaming him for all their suffering.
And his view on things wasn't always black and white. Take the political officers, the commissars. His take is actually pretty nuanced. He said the ones at the battalion level, the guys who were right there in the mud and the danger with them, were often brave, normal guys who earned their respect. But the higher-ranking party ideologues, the ones far away from the actual fighting, to him, they were just chatterboxes.
And this right here, this quote, it gets to the absolute core of the psychological pressure these guys were under. The threat didn't just come from the enemy in front of you. The fear of your own side, the fear of being shot for cowardice, was used as a weapon to make sure you moved forward, no matter what.
So after all these years of horror, of survival, of pure defiance, Sokolov's incredible journey finally reaches its improbable end, not in Berlin, but on the quiet shores of the Baltic Sea.
He talks about this one moment, when his unit finally reaches the coast, and the fighting just stops. The war is over for them, and the feeling he describes, it's not about patriotic pride or glory, it's something so much more raw and human. He calls it an intoxicatingly happy feeling, the simple, unbelievable, overwhelming thought, we will live.
Yulia Sokolov's story, it's just one of millions, right? But it's a powerful reminder that behind every grand monument, behind every official history book, there are countless individual stories of suffering, resilience, and really complicated truths. It forces us to look past the stone and bronze and ask a really important question. What other realities, what other truths have been paved over by the heroic stories we choose to remember?